Hello and welcome back to my Kerbal Space Program NASA series, episode 31, where I'm finally starting to loft some of my constellation hardware. The very first piece of equipment we're putting into orbit is going to be Hermes, the Mars Transfer Vehicle. I've taken a lot of liberties with the proposed MTV design. Well, this will be the Duna Transfer Vehicle, and it's my game, so I can make it look however the heck I want. Also, because it's going to draw more along the lines of how it was described in the book The Martian. This one's going to have more of an aerodynamic shape because I am going to make use of aero braking as much as possible to minimize delta V and also to make it look cool. A note on getting this episode out. I said I was going to have it out this previous weekend. The Unity gods must have heard me say that because the game has flat out refused to load, and I'm running into some pretty serious bugs. The nuclear engine, I have got it unlocked. I researched the technology for it. However, it is still listed as an experimental part. And I'm getting random crashes and freezes. This actually, you can't tell, but I was playing this in OpenGL mode. It was the only way I could get the game to load, but in OpenGL, particle effects are not that efficiently optimized, so it's actually very, very slow when I run it in OpenGL mode. Anytime the engines are firing or I'm going through those volumetric clouds, the frame rates crawl down into the single digits, which is bizarre. But with that out of the way, this is the crew and lander section for the Hermes, the Hermes transfer vehicle. Got a fold-away antenna for long-range communications. That is the KR7X, the one I've modded for extreme range. It's also very expensive, and I made it a bit heavier than the regular KR7 dish. And actually, this has got, even now, if I were to just fly this as it is, it would have enough delta V to make it to the moon. But this is not the primary propulsion unit that the Hermes will be using. This is just to get the first half of the ship into orbit. I wanted to build something big and impressive looking, but I didn't want to go completely nuts and make it just absolutely butcher my frame rates whenever it's on screen. And actually, this thing's pretty large and bulky looking, but it's remarkably maneuverable too. And as is the habit, I tend to only be able to start circularizing orbit once it starts getting dark, so turning it side on into the sun to get a better view of what it looks like in its current configuration. I'm going to go ahead and leave that up in orbit and then send this back to its fiery doom on Kerbin. Cutting out the boring transition through the atmosphere. Get that disposed of. And now for the heavy part, the propulsion unit. You can see this is a much more serious rocket. Although the part count is much lower, it is lofting a 3.75 meter fuel tank with 2 nuclear engines and some other support hardware on board. So it takes one monster of a rocket to get this thing to rendezvous with Hermes. And even so, it was almost not enough. Those are the absolute largest SRBs KW provides. I scaled up the 1.25 meter SRB nose cones that have those separating rockets built in. And because they're built to separate 1.25 meter payloads rather violently, it worked out pretty well to have them push those bigger boosters away more slowly than they would have otherwise. Although occasionally I run into a bug with those where I'll stage them and they just won't fire, so I just kind of got lucky on this launch. Getting ready to stabilize into a circular orbit. Going to burn off everything left in that big tank. And this is not 4 times regular speed. At this point, I was able to get the game recovered and running in Direct 3D. It's one of those weird things. I'll try to load a quick save by renaming it Persistent, and just been having a lot of difficulties lately. However, I am getting very close to the end of the line, so I'm fairly confident I'm going to be able to finish this out. And it becomes the boring process of getting the rendezvous to work after several orbits, which I cut out because that's just boring stuff watching the map screen. Finally catch up to the habitat and crew section. And it's only got a crew of 6. I've got capacity for, how many is that? 13 Kerbals on board the ship, but it's only going to hold 6. I did that kind of as a nod towards realism, giving Kerbals a little more living space, more habitable volume for a long trip. In real life, you're not going to pack somebody into an Apollo capsule and punt them to Mars. And I did try porting this. I got crazy and I tried porting this into 0.90, and it's just, as I suspected, it's just not going to work. But I was getting desperate trying to get this thing to actually just function, and that really was not an option. And all these systems, all these ships have remote tech integration, so they can be completely autonomous. I found out later that I'd forgotten to put the RCS jets on the propulsion stage. I had slapped those in as a late development in the sandbox mode where I'm developing all this hardware, and I forgot to put them on when I transferred that ship file over to my career. And the habitat section is actually a lot more maneuverable than that big transfer machine with the propulsion stage attached to it. So I decided to just make the final docking with the habitation stage. Decouple that. Then send it back on its merry way back to Kerbin. It's always kind of fun to ride these things down. I had it burn up a couple times, but this is where I was running into a lot of stability issues. I had several crashes and had to reload multiple times. Trying to find... I ended up going back to my very earliest quick save, renaming it Persistent, and then being able to F9 back to this. It's, like I said, starting to get a little unstable here. But I've been playing this save file since, geez, at least January, I think. So it's held out quite a ways, and it's definitely been quite a trooper, surviving me deleting mods when I really shouldn't. Here's the full Hermes transfer vehicle. I originally didn't have that steerable antenna on it, but I don't know, I think it adds a little bit of neatness to put it on there. And I do not have the ambient lighting mod, and I'm not using Kerbin Shine, so all my stuff tends to look a little dark. I can't, there's not really a lot I can do about that, because I can't rig up set up lighting rigs without kind of compromising my designs. So I'm going to do my best to try and make sure that I'm filming during the day as much as possible. That's about as much as I can do, which is going to go a long ways, because I notice watching some of my previous videos, I tend to do a lot of stuff at night. I do have docking bay lights, because the lander there is just strictly a lander. That is not going to get Kerbinauts from the surface of Duna back up to the ship, and that serves two purposes. There's going to be less mass to bring back from Duna, and it also means I can send up a replacement ship when it's time to restock for another trip out to Duna. I may not make a second Duna Constellation mission with the way stability's been. After closing that down for that night after that mission, came back and just flat out refused to load once again. So this is what performance in OpenGL is, with all the particle effects going on and the volumetric clouds. You can see very, very slow performance. It was painfully slow trying to fly this thing up. But once I got those SRBs out of the way, it might be something to do with the textures on those SRBs too, because once they got out of the way, performance actually improved quite a bit. And this is all in OpenGL mode. And you may have noticed that there were a couple decouplers, spare decouplers in the stage where I separated my SRBs. Those are what were holding my payload in. So unbeknownst to me, I actually finished most of that launch with this thing rattling around free in the cargo bay. I still hadn't quite figured it out at this point. I just noticed it was a little wobbly, so I was afraid that my struts had been deleted. No, that was actually completely free flying in the cargo bay, which I discovered a little bit later. So I panicked and slammed the cargo door shut on it. And this, I was going to make every effort to capture the payload and rendezvous with the station during the daytime. However, this was pretty much an emergency because I can't time warp with that thing in the cargo bay. So I decided I had to do this pretty much right away. And I had extra docking ports attached to the cupola module, and you can see it floating around in the cargo bay. And I was supposed to be able to grab it by that docking port that's still attached to the shuttle, the rear bulkhead of the shuttle cargo bay. But that plan is completely nixed now, so I had to kind of come up with something on the fly very quickly, all because I didn't check my staging. Although it did kind of take care of one concern I had. I was worried how I was going to dispose of that second docking port once I separated it from the module I'm trying to install on the station. This is the Tranquility module, which has the cupola attached to it, in case you didn't pick up on that. And thankfully everything was still suborbital, so it's going to hit the atmosphere with the fuel tank, and at least take that worry off my mind. I still had to figure out how I was going to get all this installed with, not as many docking ports as I needed to accurately manipulate everything. At the very least, because the cupola attachment point was free, I had a... this part was easy enough to capture, and then I can time warp and make my rendezvous a lot faster after I circularize. That's just a bunch of boring orbital maneuvers, so I cut that out. Since I'll be working on that side of the station, pretty much directly in line with the solar panels, I had to retract the lower ones. Start burning in on RCS so I can install this thing. And at this point, I had come up with a rudimentary, I'd come up with the outline of a plan to figure out how I was going to install all this. It was just a matter of seeing if it was actually going to work or not. The original plan was to have Hermes Kerman, who is the payload specialist, get out. I was going to align it with the shuttle and then have Hermes push it in and let the magnetic docking port take over. But that didn't quite work out as well as I was planning. I came up with that first plan because I thought the vertical stabilizer of the shuttle was going to collide with the truss, but I actually had quite a bit of clearance there. Before I do anything, I need to separate the cupola module from the main Tranquility body. And be very careful not to bump it, otherwise it's going to go careening off into space and be very difficult to capture. It's a lot of delicately maneuvering around this second part of the payload. Without paying attention, I'm actually almost done with the International Space Station. It's about ready for its first crew. It's actually been ready for its first crew for a while now, but just been a matter of... I want to have all the modules installed, ready to do science from the get-go before I put a crew on it. Bunch of very tedious, low-speed maneuvering. But thankfully the shuttle is, once again, quite agile. Go for alignment and then just kind of push in with the RCS so we can install it. And I was still planning on using Hermes to push the cupola module onto its final docking port once I got everything lined up. But, however, once we line up here and undock, Yes, the game crashed, and it crashed hard. It was very difficult once again to get back into it, but I finally did, and had to actually, this was the last quick save I had, so I had to redo this whole docking maneuver. Only difference was it was a little later at night when I finally got it installed. At this point I started creating a quick save and a manual quick save, so I'd have another point to return from. I wasn't going to try to use the shuttle to capture the cupola module because it's relatively agile, but that's a lot of fine maneuvering and I didn't want to burn up all my RCS. And I quickly came to the conclusion I'm going to have to install a docking adapter to make this thing shuttle compatible because those cargo bay doors get in the way and it can't quite link up to the shuttle where I want it to. Since these guys aren't going to crew the station, I just decided to stand the shuttle off a distance and make use of the cargo tug that is still attached to the station. Try to null out all its velocity so it doesn't drift too far. And fire this little thing up and send it out to the rescue. I didn't do this docking maneuver at night. I just wanted to capture it so I could time warp into the daytime before I installed it. Once again, I'm trying to do my absolute best to do as much of this stuff during the daytime as I can, but this all went so disastrously sideways that I had to do a couple things at night to make a good capture. My first attempt was I was going to line this thing up and then float off to the other side and bump it in. I'd kind of abandoned using a Carbonaut for that because, well, the tug was right here. Of course, alignment becomes kind of an issue when you're on the opposite side of your payload from the docking adapter. And this, at this point, is back into Direct 3D mode. This is not OpenGL, so I was getting a lot better performance. It's like 0G bowling right now. Unfortunately, I was a little wide of the mark because that wasn't the most accurate tap. So I was about to send Ermi Kerman out to capture it, but I had that wonderful resource malfunction that gets in the game sometimes when it malfunctions on me. For some reason, they will leave and not take any life support with them. I didn't think I could get this done in 2 minutes or less, so I figured I'd just park him. And at this point, I came up with a better idea of lining up with the docking port using the tug, getting some forward momentum, disengaging from it, and then getting the heck out of the way and letting it coast in on its own. Just had to be very accurate in my trajectory. Which it was close enough for magnetic grappling. Finally got that payload installed. And had to go park the tug once more. You can see how much propellant I burned off on this little thing. It was quite a bit. It's an efficient little thing, though, so. I'm really glad I didn't bring this thing back to Kerbin. Otherwise, I don't believe I could have finished that install. That is the current state of the International Space Station. I have a couple bits and bobs, some miscellaneous modules to install, but it's almost finished. I think maybe 2 more launches, and then I will be flying a crew delivery and crew return on the shuttle, but after that, my space shuttles are going to be retiring, and it's time for Venture Star to step up to the plate. Which means, logically, I should probably do a couple test flights with the Venture Star at this point, to refamiliarize myself with the vessel and see if there are any satellite deployment contracts I can use to get a little bit of cash. Because I'm really interested to see how cost-effective Venture Star is going to be, because the only thing that won't be coming back with it is whatever payload it takes up and whatever fuel it burns. So it's going to be quite interesting. It's been a long time coming, but I'm looking forward to getting it up. But at the same time, it's going to be a little bittersweet because I so do love this space shuttle. It has risen to the challenge and performed above and beyond any and all expectations. Showing a little more of the returns than I typically do, or of the landing approach, just because this one, as far as lining up and my speed management goes, this was one of my very best landings. I found the pretty decent neutral point where I can keep the nose down and at least gain speed very slowly, if not just maintain velocity. Starting to bleed off a little bit. Not necessarily flaring, but bringing the nose up so that it's losing forward velocity while also losing altitude. Managing my approach speed with the nose angle, dipping down to pick speed up and raising it up to bleed it off. I've been playing a lot, well, not a lot, I haven't been playing a lot of anything lately actually, but I have been playing, messing with Microsoft Flight Simulator occasionally, and I really think that's having a positive effect on my landing ability here. I've gotten quite good at landing heavy craft. And I don't do these landings in 4 times time acceleration because this is a very fast approach, and at 4 times normal speed, it goes much quicker than you'd expect. A safe but rather bouncy landing after a pretty frustrating mission, but it's good to have everybody back home, my payload installed, and Hermes ready for its shakedown cruise to Minmus. So stay tuned for that. That'll be the next video. We're going to send a crew up to the Hermes. We're going to attach those braces that I've installed. I've got pre-installed strut points, and we're going to go for a cruise around Minmus. So thank you for watching.